So, in our last segment, we talked about how are rivers born in the mountains, and then we talked about what do they do when the slope decreases once they come out of the mountains. Now we want to talk about what the river is going to do when it's on relatively flat terrain. So, when it was in the mountains, it was very steep and there was a lot of change in elevation, so the river could use its energy to cut downwards. Now, once it gets onto the plains, however, there isn't as much of a slope, and so it's going to use its energy to cut sideways. And so this is going to cause meandering, so that eventually the river is going to start to do this. So that's what we mean by meandering. And it's going to be a way that the river is going to get rid of this excess energy that it is developing. So once it's on the plains, at first it's going to start to go in a straight line. So rivers go in a straight line. So let's say that these are the banks of a straight river. And so how does it start with this and then eventually begin to make this S-shaped pattern? Well, even if you have a river that's going in a straight line, there's always going to be rocks and things in there that's going to make it so it's not completely uniform. So that let's say that there is a rock over here, and that's going to deflect some of this water in this direction. And that's all that a river needs. So once this water has been deflected, now the water is going to be traveling a little bit faster over here than it is over here. And the faster that the water travels, the more it is going to erode. So that this side over here is going to start to be eroded away. And then because this side over here is flowing slower, that's where it's going to start to deposit. So material is going to start to be deposited on this side of the channel, and then material is going to be eroded from this side. So we're starting to develop a little bit of a bend. Okay, now more stuff is going to be eroded off of this side over here because again it's moving faster, and more stuff is going to be deposited on this side over here. So the net effect is that we started off with a straight stretch of river, and now it's got a curve in it. And so what will happen is that eventually this straight river is going to begin to meander. And sometimes it's going to meander so much it's going to cut itself off. So it turns out that once you get these meanders going, they keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So that eventually you might have something that is going to start to maybe do this, okay? So that you have a gigantic meander right here, and then eventually the river is going to decide, as this gets closer and closer to this side over here, that maybe it's just easier to cut straight across. And then what you'll have is the river once again will be going straight, and then this part of the river out here is going to become an oxbow lake. And then eventually it's going to evaporate. And so this thing is going to go away, but you're still going to have a scar that is going to be left from where that river used to be. And so now it's straight here, but then as soon as it's straight, it's going to start to meander again. And so it will start to develop these twists and turns in it. Okay, some other things is where does the water go when there is too much water in the channel? So during times of flooding, when there is a large discharge in the channel of this river, it's going to overflow its banks, and then the area surrounding the river that is going to be filled up with water is going to be called the floodplain. So this is is going to be very distinctive for rivers that are in the plains region where the topography is very low, so that you're going to have these floodplains, places where the river naturally wants to flood and it's going to overtop its banks. So from an agricultural point of view, this is a really good thing, sort of, because whenever this river overflows its banks, it's going to deposit sediment on the floodplain, and then that sediment is very good to farm in. Of course, the problem is that if you're farming on it and then you have a flood, well, then the flood covers up your crops and then it ruins it. So it's a blessing, and then at the same time, it's not. One thing that the river will do naturally is build up a levee, so that if we look from the sideway view of here is the river channel, and then during flood stage, the water gets up to here and it overflows its banks. So the water is going to slow down when it goes into this shallow area right here. And then what it will do is, once it slows down, it's going to deposit sediment. So it will start to build up sediment on either side of the channel, and then those are going to be called natural levees. And so what that can do is, whenever you have extra amount of discharge in the river, those levees can keep the water from overtopping it and then getting onto the floodplain. Okay, now once the water does get over the levees, so let's say it's an extra large flood and the water overtops those levees, how does the water get back into the channel? Because now it's stuck. It's on the opposite side of these levees and it can't get back in. Well, it turns out that the river is going to have little smaller rivers that are going to parallel the main river, and then those are going to be called Yazoo tributaries. And what they will do is they will drain the floodplain, and then eventually they connect back into the main channel, and then they return the water back to the main river. So that's another property of these kinds of river landforms. Okay, so now we want to talk about what is a river going to do when it meets the sea, and we'll do that in our next segment.